I own this house, Michael. Check the deed. But I told you to leave.
We can fix this, honey.
No, you can't. Get out.
After 31 years of marriage, I thought the worst thing my husband could do was stop loving me. I was wrong. He brought another woman into the home my mother helped me save. Then spoke to me like I was the guest who had overstayed. What he didn't know was that the house he promised her had never truly belonged to him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. And I didn't beg him to choose me. I simply watched, listened, and remembered where I had kept the papers that would change everything. The first thing Vanessa did when she walked into my kitchen was set her white leather purse on my mother's oak table. Not beside it. Not on one of the chairs. But right in the center, where my mother used to roll out pie crust every Thanksgiving morning while telling me that a woman should always keep one drawer, one account, and one truth to herself. Richard stood behind Vanessa with his hand on the small of her back, wearing the nervous smile he used whenever he wanted something ugly to sound reasonable. "Margaret," he said, as if we were meeting at a dentist's office instead of standing in the kitchen where I had packed his lunches for 28 years. "We need to talk like adults." Vanessa looked around and smiled at the cabinets I had painted myself last spring. "It's a beautiful house," she said. "Richard told me it had great bones." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and asked, "Why is she here, Richard Sigid? Don't make this dramatic." Vanessa tilted her head and said, "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." I almost laughed at that. Richard cleared his throat and added, "She's going to be part of my life now." Then, after a pause that told me he had practiced the next sentence, he said, "And it would be easier if you stayed somewhere else for a while." For a moment, all I heard was the refrigerator humming behind me and the soft tick of the rooster clock above the pantry door. I looked at my husband's face, at the gray hair near his temples, at the man who used to kiss my forehead when the mortgage bills scared us both. And I wondered when exactly he had learned to look through me. "Somewhere else," I repeated. Richard rubbed his jaw and said, "Just temporarily. Maybe your sister's place. Or one of those extended stay hotels near the highway. I'll cover it for a month." Vanessa gave him a quick look, like a woman making sure the deal she had been promised was still on track. I asked, "You brought her here to tell me to leave my own home?" Richard's expression tightened. "Our marriage has been over for years. Margaret. You know that." I said. "No. Richard. I knew we were tired. I knew we were quiet. I didn't know you were bringing a woman into my kitchen." Vanessa lifted one hand, showing pale pink nails and a diamond bracelet I had never seen before. "I'm not trying to replace you," she said gently. "But Richard and I are building something honest." The word honest sat between us like a dirty plate no one wanted to touch. I had imagined betrayal before, in the vague way long-married women sometimes do when their husbands start guarding their phones and buying new shirts for no clear reason. I had pictured a motel receipt, a restaurant bill, maybe a text message lighting up in the dark. I had not pictured this. I had not pictured another woman standing under the pendant lights I had picked out at Home Depot after saving coupons for 3 months. I had not pictured her looking toward the hallway and asking, "Is the primary bedroom upstairs?" Richard gave her a warning glance. But it came too late. My chest felt hollow. Not like heartbreak in the movies, but like someone had opened a cabinet inside me and quietly removed every dish. "You showed her our bedroom?" I asked. Richard said. "Margaret. Don't start." I said. "Did you show her the closet too? The quilt my grandmother made, the photo wall." Vanessa folded her arms, suddenly less soft. Richard said, "You two had been living separate lives." I looked at my husband. Separate lives still shared a mortgage, a dinner table, and a last name. Richard's mouth hardened. "A last name doesn't make a marriage." That was the first sentence that truly cut me. Not because it was false, but because part of it was true. We had become quiet people, moving around each other like furniture. He watched television in the den. I read in bed. He took calls in the garage. I pretended not to hear him lower his voice. I had forgiven small things so often that forgiveness had become a room I locked myself inside. But there is a difference between a dying marriage and a public eviction. There is a difference between falling out of love and bringing a stranger home to measure the curtains. I folded the dish towel carefully and placed it beside the sink. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. Richard seemed relieved by my calm, which told me how little he understood it. Pack a few things tonight, he said. We'll sort out the legal stuff later. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just need space to move forward. Vanessa touched his arm and said, we both do. I looked at her hand. Then at the table beneath her purse. My mother's table. My mother's house money. My mother's warning. Richard walked to the drawer beside the stove. The one where we kept batteries. Spare keys. Take-out menus. And all the little things a family pretends are not important until something breaks. He opened it like he owned every object inside. I already made a copy of the front door key, he said. But Vanessa will need the garage code too. Eventually. The word eventually told me this was not a confession. It was a plan already in motion. He moved a stack of envelopes aside, searching for the small card where I had once written the alarm instructions for our neighbor. I watched his fingers brush past a cream-colored envelope with my maiden name typed on the front, Margaret Ellis Whitmore. Brooks and Hale Family Law. My heart gave one hard knock. That envelope had been there for nearly 9 years. Hidden under appliance warranties and expired coupons, because Richard never looked closely at anything he considered domestic. Inside was not the deed itself, but a letter from Elaine Brooks, the attorney who had helped my mother structure the inheritance after Dad died. Richard pushed the envelope aside without reading it. Where's that garage code card? He muttered. I said. You never cared about that drawer before. He answered. I care now. Vanessa took a slow walk around the kitchen as if she were touring an open house. She stopped near the bay window, where basil and rosemary grew in chipped clay pots, and said, I'd probably change these curtains. They make the room feel older. Richard laughed under his breath, trying to make it sound harmless. Margaret likes things sentimental. I looked at him then. Really looked. And saw not just a cheating husband but a man who had built a private story where I was the obstacle. The outdated fixture. The woman too attached to old wood and family dishes. Vanessa pointed toward the china cabinet. Are those antiques? She asked. I said. They were my mother's. She smiled politely. Oh. Well. Maybe you'll want to take them with you. Richard shot her another look. But she had already said enough. Take them with you. As if I were packing up after a visit. As if the cabinet had not been carried in by my brothers the week after my mother's funeral. As if this house had not held my grief long before it held Richard's ambition. I did not tell them then that the first down payment on that house came from a life insurance check my mother had refused to spend on herself. I did not tell them that when Richard's contracting business nearly folded in 2009, I had used the rest of my inheritance to keep us from losing the place. I did not remind him that, while he shook hands at church and told people a man needed to provide, I was the one calling the mortgage office, asking for patience in a voice so calm I barely recognized it. Those truths rose in me one by one. But I kept them behind my teeth. Richard mistook silence for weakness because I had trained him to. Every time he forgot an anniversary and I said it was fine. Every time he snapped at me in front of friends and I changed the subject. Every time he treated my patience like permission. I had helped build the man standing in front of me. That was the hardest part to admit. His cruelty was his choice. But my disappearance had been slow. Paulita. And self-inflicted. Richard finally found the small paper with the garage code and held it up like a victory. There it is. He said. I'll change it later anyway. I asked. Why would you change the garage code? He looked annoyed. Because this arrangement needs boundaries. The word almost made me smile. Boundaries. After 31 years of him walking through every soft place in my life, he had discovered boundaries only when another woman wanted my parking spot. Vanessa stepped closer to him and said, maybe this should wait. She looks upset. I answered before Richard could. I am upset. I'm just not confused. Richard frowned. What does that mean? I picked up Vanessa's purse from my mother's table and handed it to her. I did it gently. That mattered to me later. I did not throw it. I did not shake. I simply placed the strap in her hand and said, "Please don't put this on my table again." Vanessa's face colored. Richard snapped. "Margaret. Don't be petty." I looked at him and said, "Petty would be arguing over curtains. I'm talking about respect." The room went still in that strange way a house does when it knows a family has crossed a line. Richard stared at me, perhaps waiting for the version of his wife who would apologize for making everyone uncomfortable. I had been that woman for so long that even I waited for her to appear. But she didn't. I walked past both of them to the hallway and stopped beneath the family photo wall. There we were in silver frames, our wedding day. Our trip to Yellowstone. Richard holding a turkey platter one Thanksgiving while I stood beside him in an apron. Smiling like partnership had ever been equal. At the bottom of the wall was a small picture of my mother on the front porch. Taken the day I first got the keys. She was thinner then. Already sick. But she had both hands clasped under her chin like a girl seeing the ocean. Richard followed me. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Laundry room." I said. "I need something." He scoffed. "This is exactly what I mean. You avoid every real conversation." I turned back and said, "No. Richard. I'm finally having one. Just not with you first." In the laundry room. Behind a stack of old beach towels and a plastic bin of Christmas ribbons, sat the small fireproof box my mother had bought me before she died. Richard used to tease me about it. "Your little treasure chest," he called it. As if birth certificates, insurance papers, and property tax bills were women's clutter. I knelt down slowly because my knees were not what they used to be. And for the first time that evening, my hands trembled. Not from fear of Richard. From the weight of realizing I still had a choice. I touched the lid of the box but did not open it. "Not yet." Vanessa's voice floated from the kitchen, low and anxious. "Are you sure she won't make this difficult?" Richard answered. "Margaret, she'll cry. Call her sister. And calm down. She always does." I closed my eyes. There are moments when a sentence ends a marriage more completely than an affair ever could. That was mine. Not the woman in my kitchen. Not the request that I leave. It was the certainty in his voice when he said I would calm down. I stood. Took the cream-colored envelope from the junk drawer on my way back. And slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan before either of them noticed. Richard was at the sink now, drinking from the glass I had used that morning. Vanessa stood near the hallway. No longer touring. No longer smiling. Maybe some small instinct warned her that the quiet wife was not as empty-handed as she looked. Richard said, "Look, Margaret. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I nodded once. "You're right." Relief crossed his face too quickly. "Good. Then you understand." I said. "I understand more than I did 20 minutes ago." He exhaled. "So you'll pack." I looked around the kitchen. At the curtains, Vanessa disliked. At the table, my mother loved. At the floor I had scrubbed before every family birthday. Every Easter brunch. Every ordinary Sunday dinner, no one remembered because I made ordinary feel effortless. "Not tonight," I said. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't make me involve lawyers." My fingers closed around the envelope in my pocket. "No," I said quietly. "Let's definitely involve lawyers." For the first time all evening, Richard had nothing ready to say. Vanessa looked from him to me. And I saw the smallest crack in the story he had sold her. Maybe he had told her I was fragile. Maybe he had told her I was dependent. Maybe he had told her the house, the furniture, the life, all of it, was his to rearrange. I did not correct him yet. Some truths need a proper table. Some papers deserve witnesses. I walked to the front door and opened it. "You should both leave," I said. Richard let out a sharp laugh. "You're kicking me out of my own house." I met his eyes. My voice did not rise. "I'm asking you to leave before one of us says something that can't be taken back." Vanessa whispered. "Richard. Maybe we should go." He pointed at me. "This isn't over." I thought of my mother's hand on mine. Years ago. guiding my signature across documents I had barely understood because grief had made the words swim. "No," I said. "It's not." Then I watched my husband walk out with the woman he had brought to replace me, while the envelope in my pocket felt heavier than a set of keys. After their car pulled out of the driveway, the house did not feel victorious. It felt wounded. I locked the door, leaned my forehead against the cool painted wood, and let one breath break into another until I could stand straight again. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon dish soap and Vanessa's perfume. Her presence had not lasted an hour, but it had touched everything. I went back to my mother's table and wiped the center with a damp cloth. Slowly, carefully, as if cleaning a wound. Then I took the envelope from my pocket and placed it under the rooster clock. Brooks and Hale Family Law. Margaret Ellis Whitmore. I had not used my maiden name in years, but seeing it there felt like hearing someone call me back from a long distance. I did not open the envelope that night. I already knew enough to make the first call in the morning. Instead, I sat alone in the kitchen. My husband had promised to another woman and whispered to the empty chair across from me. "Mom, I think I finally understand why you told me to keep one truth to myself." I slept less than 2 hours that night. And even that was not really sleep. It was a shallow, nervous drifting between the sound of Richard's car leaving and the memory of Vanessa's purse sitting on my mother's table. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending and walked downstairs in my robe. The house looked the way it always did after midnight: quiet hallway, soft hum from the refrigerator, blue light from the microwave clock, family photos watching me like witnesses who had sworn not to speak. I made tea I did not drink and finally opened the cream-colored envelope beneath the rooster clock. Inside was a letter from Elaine Brooks, dated 9 years earlier, after my mother passed. It began, "Dear Margaret, please keep this with your personal records." And that one sentence alone made my throat close. Elaine had written that the original purchase funds and later mortgage rescue payments tied to the house should remain documented as separate inherited assets. Attached were copies of old bank transfers, a memo about the deed, and a handwritten note from my mother on yellow legal paper: "Maggie, love is not a reason to forget your own name." I read that line 4 times before I let myself cry. By 7:30, I had showered, dressed, and placed the old papers back in the envelope with a care I usually reserved for Christmas ornaments. Richard had not come home. He had sent one text at 1218 a.m. that said, "We'll talk when you're calmer." I looked at those words while standing at the kitchen counter and felt something inside me settle into place. Not rage. Rage would have been easier. This was colder and steadier. I typed nothing back. Instead, I found Elaine Brooks's number in the letterhead. Unsure whether she had retired, moved, or even remembered me, her receptionist answered on the third ring with a cheerful voice that belonged to a world where husbands did not bring mistresses into kitchens. "Brooks and Hale. This is Tammy." My own voice sounded strange when I said, "This is Margaret Whitmore. Elaine Brooks helped my mother, Helen Ellis, with estate documents years ago. I need to speak with her if she's available." There was a pause. Typing. Then Tammy said, "Mrs. Whitmore. Ms. Brooks is semi-retired now, but she still comes in on Thursdays. Is this urgent?" I looked at the table, at the faint square where Vanessa's purse had rested. "Yes," I said. "I believe it is." Elaine called me back 23 minutes later. Her voice was older than I remembered but still firm. The kind of voice that could calm a room without asking permission. "Margaret," she said. "I'm sorry, it's under difficult circumstances. But I'm glad you called." That made me sit down. "You know it's difficult?" I asked. She gave a small sigh. "When someone calls about old property documents at 8 in the morning, it usually is." I told her enough. Not everything. I told her Richard had brought another woman to the house, that he had asked me to leave, and that he spoke as though he had the right to decide what happened next. Elaine did not gasp or curse him. She simply asked, "Did you sign anything?" I said. "No." "Good." She replied. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree in writing to leave the home. Do not send emotional texts. Do not let him pressure you into a private arrangement. I pressed my hand flat against the table. Aileen. Does he own this house with me? There was a brief rustle of paper on her end. Or maybe she was opening an old digital file. Based on what I'm seeing. Margaret. The deed and supporting inheritance records are much more favorable to you than Richard may understand. But I need to review the full file before giving you clear direction. Then she added. Gently. Bring everything you have. I spent the next hour gathering the pieces of a life Richard had dismissed as clutter. In the fireproof box, I found the original closing folder. Property tax bills. Mortgage statements. Insurance papers. And bank records so old the ink had faded at the edges. I found the receipt for the roof repair I had paid for from my mother's remaining account in 2009. When Richard's business had slowed and he spent most evenings sitting in the garage, pretending not to be afraid, I found a letter from the mortgage company thanking me for a lump sum payment that had brought us current. At the time, I had not thought of it as proof. I had thought of it as survival. Marriage teaches women to turn evidence into sacrifice and sacrifice into silence. I tucked everything into a canvas tote bag from the county library and almost laughed at the plainness of it. Richard had walked in with a woman wearing perfume that probably cost more than my winter coat. And I was going to answer him with manila folders, tax bills, and a tote bag that said read more books. For the first time since Vanessa entered my kitchen, I felt the faintest spark of something that was not humiliation. Richard came home a little after 9. Alone. Smelling like hotel soap and impatience. I was at the dining room table, sorting copies into piles. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the papers. What is all this? He asked. I did not look up. Records. He laughed once. Records of what? How long you can hold a grudge? I slid a property tax bill into a folder. You said we should involve lawyers. His face changed. Not dramatically. But enough. A tightening around the eyes. A small correction in posture. I said, don't make me involve lawyers. He replied. That's different. I finally looked at him. Not to me. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. The way he did when he thought volume control made him reasonable. Margaret. Last night got out of hand. Vanessa shouldn't have said some of those things. But you embarrassed me. I stared at him. That was what he had brought home from the night, not shame. Not regret. But embarrassment. You brought another woman into my kitchen and asked me to leave. I said. I embarrassed you by not handing her a drawer. He rubbed his forehead. This is why we can't talk. You twist everything. I put another paper in the folder and said. No. I'm finally untwisting it. He tried a different approach then. Softer and more dangerous. He sat across from me at the dining room table and reached for my hand. But I moved it before he could touch me. For a second. Hurt flashed across his face. And I hated that a part of me still noticed. Maggie. He said. Using the name he only used when he wanted access to the woman I used to be. We had good years. Nobody's denying that. But we're older now. People change. I deserve a chance to be happy. I looked at his wedding ring. He was still wearing it. Maybe he had forgotten to take it off. Or maybe he liked the convenience of appearing married when useful and free when desired. Do I deserve a chance to be safe? I asked. He frowned. Safe, come on. I said. You asked me to leave my home without warning. You brought a woman here who was already talking about my bedroom and my curtains. You took the garage code from my drawer. What word would you prefer? He stood abruptly. I'm not going to be made into a villain because I fell in love with someone else. I answered. No. Richard. Falling in love didn't make you a villain. What you did after did. That was when he made his first mistake of the day. He said. You wouldn't even know what to do with this house by yourself. The words hung there. Ugly in their honesty. He did not mean repairs or taxes or insurance. Not really. He meant I had become part of the furniture in his mind. Useful but stationary. Familiar but not powerful. I closed the folder and placed both hands on top of it. I knew what to do when the mortgage was 3 months behind. I said. I knew what to do when the furnace died in January and you were waiting on checks that never came. I knew what to do when your business account couldn't cover payroll and you sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before coming inside. Don't confuse silence with ignorance. His mouth opened, then closed. For one flicker of a second, the old Richard appeared, the man who remembered. Then pride came back over his face like a curtain. Ancient history, he muttered. The law doesn't care about your feelings. I stood up with the folder in my hand. You're right, I said. That's why I'm taking documents. I did not tell him where I was going. I left through the front door with the canvas tote on my shoulder and my car keys pressed so tightly in my hand they left marks in my palm. My first instinct was to drive straight to Elaine's office downtown. But she had suggested something quieter. Meet me at Miller's Diner at 11. She had said. Back booth. Bring copies if you can. Originals if you must. And Margaret. Do not leave the originals unattended. Miller's had been in our town since before Richard and I married. A place with cracked red vinyl seats. Waitresses who called everyone honey. And pie displayed under glass near the register. I arrived early and sat facing the door like a woman in a detective movie. Except my disguise was a beige cardigan and a library tote full of property records. Elaine arrived at exactly 11. Wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather folder that looked older than some attorneys. She did remember me. More than that. She remembered my mother. Helen was very clear. She said as she slid into the booth. She wanted you protected. Even if you never needed the protection. I looked down at my hands. I thought needing it would mean I had failed. Elaine's expression softened. No. It means she knew life. We spread the papers carefully between coffee cups and silverware wrapped in napkins. Elaine reviewed them with a calm that made each page feel less like a memory and more like a shield. She explained without making promises. Choosing her words with the precision of someone who respected both law and pain. The house was purchased during the marriage. Yes. But the source of funds matters. The deed history matters. The inheritance records matter. The mortgage rescue payments matter. Depending on what has been changed or not changed since. Richard may have far less control than he thinks. I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all morning. Can he make me leave? Elaine looked directly at me. Not by simply declaring it. And certainly not by bringing someone else into the home and pressuring you at the kitchen table. I breathed for what felt like the first time in hours. Then she asked. Has he tried to borrow against the house recently? I blinked. Why would you ask that? Elaine tapped one of the statements with her pen. Because men who suddenly want a spouse out of a house often have a financial reason hiding behind the romantic one. I might have dismissed the question 2 days earlier. I might have said Richard was selfish, but not reckless. Dishonest, but not foolish with money. But betrayal changes the lighting in every room of memory. Suddenly, I remembered the mail he had grabbed too quickly. The hushed calls in the garage. The bank envelope in his truck console when I borrowed it to pick up mulch. I remembered Vanessa saying, "Are you sure she won't make this difficult?" As if my difficulty could interfere with more than their comfort. Elaine saw my face and waited. There was an email. I said slowly. I saw it on the printer last week. I thought it was junk or some business thing. Something about collateral. Elaine's pen stopped moving. Do you still have it? I closed my eyes. Trying to picture the paper. Richard had snatched it from the printer tray when he came in from the garage. Smiling too brightly. No. I said. But he may have thrown it in the recycling bin in his office. Elaine leaned back. Do not search his private accounts. Do not do anything that creates trouble for you. But if there are papers in common areas of your home, preserve what you lawfully can. Then she gave me a look that felt almost maternal. And please understand this: the goal is not revenge. The goal is protection. Protection. I carried that word home with me like a warm stone in my pocket. Richard's car was gone when I returned. And the house looked innocent in the afternoon light. I stood in the foyer listening, half expecting Vanessa's laugh to come from upstairs. But there was only silence. I went into Richard's office. A room that had once been our son's bedroom before he moved to Oregon and called less and less. I did not open drawers. I did not touch his computer. I only lifted the top layer of the recycling bin beside the shredder. There, beneath a grocery flyer and a torn envelope, was half of a printed email. The top was missing, but the body remained revised loan terms. Home equity consideration. Urgent need to verify authorized ownership. Pending spouse signature. My stomach turned. Not because I understood every line, but because I understood enough. Richard had not brought Vanessa home simply because he was cruel and impatient. He needed control of the house before someone at the bank asked too many questions. I took a photo of the paper where it lay, then placed it in a plastic sleeve without smoothing the torn edge. Evidence. I was learning. Did not need to look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like trash someone thought a wife would never read. That evening, Richard texted me 3 times. The first said, "We need to act like adults." The second said, "Vanessa feels terrible about how last night went." The third came after 9 and said, "I have papers for us to sign tomorrow. Nothing major. Just to create breathing room." I sat at the kitchen table with Elaine's business card beside my phone and typed one sentence: "I will not sign anything unless my attorney reviews it." The reply came almost instantly. "Attorney." Then another. "You're making a mistake." Then, "Don't turn this into a war." I looked at the words until they blurred. Then set the phone face down. He still believed he got to name the thing. If he called it breathing room, I was supposed to forget it was displacement. If he called it happiness, I was supposed to forget it was betrayal. If he called it war, I was supposed to drop every defense and prove I was kind. I had spent 31 years being kind enough for both of us. That night, kindness looked different. It looked like locking the fireproof box. It looked like making copies. It looked like writing down dates while my hand shook. It looked like not answering the door when he came home late and knocked on the bedroom I had locked for the first time in my marriage. In the dark, with Richard sleeping in the guest room and the hallway between us feeling wider than any highway, I lay awake and thought of my mother's note. Love is not a reason to forget your own name. For years, I had believed love meant blending everything until no one could tell where I ended and Richard began. Our bank accounts, our calendars, our holidays, our friends, even our stories had become one long married sentence. And somewhere in the middle of it, I had stopped capitalizing myself. But the papers in the fireproof box told another story. They said Margaret Ellis Whitmore had existed before she was Mrs. Richard Whitmore. They said she had inherited something, protected something, paid something, signed something. They said she was not a guest in her own life. I did not know yet how ugly Richard would become when he realized that. I did not know Vanessa would return with boxes. I did not know his sister Carol would sit at my dining table and talk about fairness while eyeing my mother's china. But I knew one thing clearly enough to sleep just before dawn the next time my husband asked me to leave. I would not be answering alone. By noon the next day, Richard had changed his strategy from pressure to performance. He did not apologize. But he did shave. Put on the blue button-down shirt I used to say made his eyes look kind. And walked into the kitchen holding a folder as if the folder itself could make him respectable again. "Carol is coming over tonight," he said. Without asking. I was rinsing a coffee mug at the sink, watching his reflection in the dark window above it. "Your sister?" I asked. Though we both knew which Carol he meant. "She cares about both of us," he said. "She can help keep this civil." Civil was becoming his favorite word. A small white cloth he kept trying to lay over the mess he had made. I dried the mug slowly and said, "Will Vanessa be here too?" His eyes flickered. "Just enough. For part of it. She deserves clarity." I turned then. "Your mistress deserves clarity at my dining table." He flinched at the word mistress. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it sounded too plain. "Don't use ugly words," he said. I looked at the folder under his arm. Then stopped doing ugly things and asking me to rename them. I called Elaine immediately after Richard left for what he claimed was a supplier meeting. She listened without interrupting while I told her about Carol, Vanessa, and the folder. "Do not sign," she said again. "Do not agree verbally to move out. If they present documents, You may accept copies, but do not debate legal conclusions with them. I smiled sadly at the phone. I've spent 31 years debating with Richard and losing. Elaine's voice softened. Then tonight you don't debate. You observe. Before hanging up, she asked whether I had someone nearby who could check on me afterward. I almost said no. Because pride is a stubborn little guard dog. But then I thought of Nora Bell from next door, who had brought soup when I had pneumonia and always noticed when my porch light stayed off too long. I called her. Nora answered over the sound of running water and said, "Honey, I've been waiting for you to call. I saw that woman leave last night." Shame rose in me. Hot and useless. "I don't want gossip," I said. Nora's voice became firm. "Then you called the right neighbor." "What do you need?" I asked if she could simply keep her phone nearby that evening. She said, "I'll keep my porch light on too." At 5:30, I set the dining table for 4 because refusing would have given Richard the satisfaction of calling me hysterical. I used the everyday plates, not my mother's china. That decision felt small, but it mattered. Vanessa would not eat off the dishes my mother had carried through 3 moves and 1 widowhood. I made coffee, sliced a store-bought pound cake, and placed a pitcher of water near the center. I did not cook dinner. For decades, my first response to discomfort had been feeding people until they forgave the room. Not tonight. When Richard walked in with Carol and Vanessa behind him, Carol's eyes traveled over the table with immediate judgment. She was 2 years younger than Richard. A retired school administrator who believed every conflict could be solved by the quietest woman surrendering first. She hugged me stiffly and said, "Margaret, you look tired." I answered, "I am." Vanessa wore cream slacks, gold earrings, and a soft green blouse that probably cost more than the groceries I had skipped buying that week. Around her neck was my anniversary necklace, the small gold pendant Richard had given me on our 25th. The one I had thought was lost in the upstairs jewelry drawer. My breath stopped. But only for a second. Then I looked at Richard and knew he had taken it. Given it. And expected me not to notice. We sat around the dining table like people posing for a photograph no one wanted. Richard opened the folder before anyone touched the coffee. "I drafted something simple," he said. "Not a divorce agreement. Just a temporary separation understanding. So everyone has space." Carol nodded as if she had already approved the script. "That sounds very reasonable." I looked at the papers but did not reach for them. "Who drafted it?" I asked. Richard tapped the top page. "A template. It's not a big deal." Vanessa placed both hands around her coffee cup and said, "This is just to reduce tension." I looked at the pendant at her throat. "Is that why you're wearing my necklace?" The room froze. Vanessa's fingers flew to her neck. Richard's face darkened. "Margaret," he warned. Carol hid. "This is exactly what we need to avoid. Personal attacks won't help." I almost smiled. In that room, apparently, bringing a mistress to my table was complicated. But naming stolen jewelry was a personal attack. Vanessa said. "Richard told me it was from a box of things you didn't wear anymore." I said. "Richard tells many useful stories." Then I held out my hand. "Take it off." Vanessa looked at Richard, waiting for him to rescue her from the embarrassment he had created. He leaned back in his chair and said, "It's a necklace." "Margaret." I kept my hand out. "No. It is a gift for my husband. Given to his wife. Now, hanging around the neck of the woman he brought to push me out of my home." "Take it off." Carol made a soft disapproving sound. "This is beneath you." I turned to her. "Then imagine how far beneath me last night felt." Vanessa's cheeks reddened as she unclasped the chain. She placed it on the table. Not in my hand. And the small pendant made a quiet sound against the wood. Richard muttered. Satisfied, I picked up the necklace and closed my fist around it. Not even close. For the first time, Carol looked uncertain. Maybe she had expected tears. Shouting. Some scene that would let her file me under difficult and move on. Instead, I sat there with my shoulders straight. The everyday plates between us. and watched them realize that calm did not mean consent. Richard pushed the papers toward me. Let's get back to the point. This says you agree to stay somewhere else for 90 days while we decide how to divide things. It also says neither of us will interfere with the other's personal relationships during that time. I looked at the page without touching it. 90 days. I repeated. Where would I live? Carol jumped in with the voice she used on misbehaving 7th graders. Margaret. There are very nice extended stay places near the interstate. And frankly, a little distance might help you accept reality. I looked at my sister-in-law. Remembering every Thanksgiving she had brought undercooked green beans and left with containers of my leftovers. Every Christmas, she had asked to borrow folding chairs. Every summer, she had dropped her grandchildren in my yard for just an hour that became 5. Carol. I said. How many nights have you slept in this house? She blinked. What, over the years? Holidays. Storms. Family reunions. How many? She shifted in her seat. That has nothing to do with this. I said. It has everything to do with this. People are very comfortable calling a place home when they need shelter. And very quick to call it Richard's when they want me removed. Vanessa's softness finally slipped. No one is removing you. She said. We're trying to create a healthier situation. I looked at her then. Not as a rival. But as a woman who had accepted a story because it benefited her. A healthier situation would have been waiting outside while a married man spoke to his wife. A healthier situation would have been asking why he needed you to see the house before I knew the marriage was ending. A healthier situation would have been not wearing another woman's necklace to her dining table. She looked down. Richard slapped his palm once against the table, not hard enough to be dangerous, but loud enough to remind me how often noise had been his shortcut to control. Enough. He said. You're not the only person hurt here. Something inside me went very quiet. You are right. I said. I'm not. You hurt more people than me. You just haven't had to look at them yet. He stared at me as though he did not recognize my voice. Maybe he didn't. I was starting to recognize it myself. Carol reached for the papers and turned them toward me with a tight smile. Margaret. No one is saying you don't matter. But Richard has carried the financial responsibility of this family for a long time. The house. The taxes. The upkeep, it's a lot for a man. You've had the benefit of stability. Maybe now the kindest thing you can do is not punish him for wanting a new chapter. I heard Elaine's instruction in my mind observe. So I observed Carol's pearl earrings. Vanessa's lowered eyes. Richard's jaw working as he waited for me to shrink. I observed the folder. The unsigned line. The phrase, voluntary temporary relocation printed near the bottom of page 2. Then I said. Do you know who paid the property taxes last spring? Carol frowned. That's not the issue. I asked Richard. Do you know? He scoffed. From our account. Obviously. I nodded. And who moved the money into that account? He looked away. There it was. The smallest crack. Carol noticed it too. And for once she did not rush to fill the silence. I stood and walked to the sideboard, where I had placed a plain manila envelope before they arrived. Richard watched me carefully. What is that? He asked. Copies. I said. For my attorney. His face flushed. I told you not to turn this into a war. I turned back to him. No. Richard. You told me not to defend myself. Vanessa whispered. You have an attorney. Carol sat back as if I had announced I owned a motorcycle gang instead of legal counsel. I placed the envelope beside Richard's folder but did not open it. That restraint took more strength than anger ever had. I wanted to spread every tax bill, every inheritance record, every mortgage rescue letter across the table and watch his confidence fall apart. But Elaine had warned me that timing mattered. Truth was not only a weapon. It was also a door. And if you opened it too early, the wrong people ran through first. So I only said, I won't sign anything at my own table. Richard laughed. Sharp and mean. Your table, Margaret. This sentimental routine is exhausting. I looked at the oak beneath my hands. Yes. I said. My table. That laugh should have embarrassed him. But it seemed to restore him instead. He stood, gathering the pages with quick, angry movements. Fine. Keep playing the martyr. But I'm done living like a prisoner in my own house. Carol stood too, smoothing her blouse. I hope you think carefully, she said to me. Bitterness can make a woman very lonely. I looked at her and felt, surprisingly, no hatred. Only distance. So, can a family that only values her when she is useful? Vanessa rose last. She placed her cup in the sink, which somehow offended me more than if she had left it on the table, because it suggested practice. Ownership. The casual ease of a woman imagining future mornings there. At the doorway, Richard turned back. Tomorrow morning, we're moving some of my things into the primary bedroom and clearing space. I don't care if you like it, I answered. Bring whatever you think you need. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I picked up my necklace from the table and slipped it into my pocket. It means I heard you. When the door closed behind them, I did not collapse. I did not call Elaine immediately. I walked to the sink, removed Vanessa's cup, and put it straight into the trash. It was only a chipped white mug from a grocery store set. Nothing special. But I never wanted to lift it to my lips by mistake. Then I went to the front window and saw Nora's porch light glowing next door. Warm and steady in the dark. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. You okay? I typed back. Not really. But I'm standing. She replied. That counts. I held the phone against my chest for a moment. And the kindness of those 2 words nearly undid me. Blood had sat at my table that night and asked me to disappear. A neighbor behind a lit window had reminded me I still existed. I took a photo of Richard's unsigned papers before placing them in the envelope for Elaine. Then I wrote down every sentence I could remember. 90 days. Breathing room. Extended stay hotel. Don't interfere. Financial responsibility. New chapter. By the time I finished, my grief had become a record. My record had become a boundary. Just before midnight, I went upstairs to the primary bedroom and opened the jewelry drawer Richard had raided. There was an empty square in the velvet tray where the necklace had been. Beside it sat my wedding ring dish. A small blue ceramic bowl our son made in 3rd grade. I took off my ring for the first time since Richard slid it onto my finger in a Methodist church with bad carpet and good intentions. My hand looked older, without it. But not weaker. I placed the ring in the bowl and set the recovered necklace beside it. Then I locked the bedroom door. Not because a lock could solve betrayal, but because one small boundary often teaches the heart how to build larger ones. In the hallway, I heard Richard return much later. Heard him pause outside the door. Heard the knob turn once and stop. Margaret, he said through the wood. Low and angry. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I sat on the edge of the bed. My mother's documents stacked neatly beside me. And answered. No. I'm making it as hard as it should have been from the beginning. Saturday morning began with the sound of a truck backing into my driveway. Not Richard's truck. Not a neighbor's. A white moving van with a dented bumper and a blue logo on the side that promised fast, friendly service. I was standing in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee untouched when I heard the beep. Beep. Beep roll through the house like a warning. For a moment, my body reacted before my mind did. My hand reached for the edge of the counter. And I felt the old version of myself rising, the woman who would have opened the door. Smiled too tightly. Asked what was happening. And tried to make everybody comfortable while they dismantled her life. Then my phone buzzed. It was Elaine. I'm 5 minutes away. Do not open the door until I arrive unless you feel safe doing so. I looked through the front window and saw Richard step out of his car wearing jeans, work gloves, and the expression of a man who had decided confidence was the same thing as permission. Vanessa got out behind him, carrying a clipboard she had no right to hold. Richard pointed toward the garage and told one of the movers. We'll start with the upstairs bedroom. I opened the front door before he could use his key. Not because I was ready for him, but because I was done letting him enter my life like a man returning to property. Richard stopped on the porch with one hand raised toward the lock. Vanessa stood 2 steps behind him. Her hair pulled back. Sunglasses perched on her head. Dressed like a woman overseeing a renovation. One of the movers looked from Richard to me and instantly seemed to regret accepting the job. Margaret, Richard said, forcing patience into his voice. Don't start this on the porch. I glanced at the men near the truck. You brought strangers to move my belongings out of my bedroom. The porch is the polite version. Vanessa shifted her weight and said, We're not throwing anything away. We're just creating space. I looked at her clipboard. For what? She hesitated. Richard answered for her. For reality. You refused to sign a simple agreement. So I'm doing what needs to be done. Behind him, the mover with a gray beard cleared his throat and asked, Sir, is everyone here in agreement about the move? Richard snapped. Yes. I said. No. That one word changed the air more than a shout would have. The younger mover lowered the empty cardboard box in his hands. Richard turned on me. Color rising in his neck. You are embarrassing yourself. He said. You can't just stand in the doorway and hold the house hostage. I looked past him toward the street, where Nora's curtains moved slightly. Her porch light was off in the daylight. But I knew she was watching. That knowledge steadied me. I'm not holding anything hostage. I said. I'm refusing to have my personal property moved by people I did not hire. Vanessa took off her sunglasses and tried the gentle voice again. Margaret. This is painful for everyone. Richard said you agreed the bedroom situation was temporary. I almost admired how easily she could turn a lie into a misunderstanding. Richard has said many things. I replied. Most of them seemed to benefit Richard. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the movers would not hear. If you make me look like a fool in front of these men, you will regret it. I held his stare and felt the fear arrive. Old and familiar. Then passed through me without finding a place to sit. You did not need my help for that. I said. A black sedan pulled up behind the moving van before Richard could answer. Elaine Brooke stepped out with a leather folder in one hand and a calm so complete it seemed to slow the whole street. She was small, silver-haired, and dressed in a dark suit. But every person in the driveway turned toward her like she had arrived with a judge's bench in her trunk. Richard frowned. Who is that? I said. My attorney. Vanessa's face changed first. Not dramatically, just a quick tightening around her mouth. Like a woman realizing the floor plan she had imagined did not include a locked door. Elaine came up the walkway and stopped beside me. Not in front of me. That mattered. She did not rescue me. She stood with me. Mr. Whitmore. She said. I'm Elaine Brooks. I represent Margaret regarding the marital separation and property issues. I understand you've brought movers to the residence. Richard gave a bitter little laugh. This is a family matter. Elaine looked at the moving truck. Then at Vanessa. Then back at Richard. It became a legal matter when you attempted to remove Mrs. Whitmore's belongings without her consent. The gray-bearded mover took one step backward. Richard tried to recover with volume. He always had. This is my home too. He said. I have every right to move my things around. Elaine nodded once. You may remove your own personal belongings by arrangement. You may not remove Margaret's belongings from the primary bedroom. Pressure her to vacate. Or represent to third parties that you have authority that is currently disputed. Richard's face reddened. Disputed by who? Her. Because she found some old papers and suddenly thinks she's a real estate lawyer. I felt the insult land. But it did not enter me the way it once would have. Elaine opened her folder. Disputed by the deed history. Inheritance documentation. Mortgage payment records. Property tax records. And your recent attempt to obtain financing that appears to require spousal authorization you do not yet have. The sentence fell quietly. But it hit harder than Richard's palm had hit the dining table. Vanessa looked at him. Recent attempt to obtain financing. Richard shot her a warning look. Not now. Elaine turned to the movers. Gentlemen. I would advise you not to remove anything from this home today unless both parties provide written authorization. The older mover nodded immediately. Ma'am. We don't want any trouble. Richard followed us into the kitchen because pride would not let him stay outside with men who had just stopped obeying him. Vanessa came too. Slower this time. Without the clipboard. Elaine placed her folder on my mother's oak table. I noticed Vanessa's eyes drop to the surface. Perhaps remembering the purse. Perhaps not. Richard stood at the far end with his arms folded. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Margaret is upset. And you're feeding it." Elaine removed the first document and set it down with care. "This is a certified copy of the deed record we obtained yesterday afternoon. This is the inheritance memo from Helen Ellis's estate file. These are records of funds used for the original purchase. These are mortgage cure payments made from Margaret's separate inherited funds. These are property tax payments made through accounts Richard did not fund." With every page, Richard's expression shifted from irritation to calculation. I knew that look. It was the face he wore when a repair estimate came in higher than expected. Vanessa finally whispered. "Richard. You told me the house was yours." He said. "It is. It's ours. It's complicated." I looked at him and said. "You never liked complicated when I was the one explaining it." Elaine did not accuse him of crimes. She did not shout. She did not threaten television-style consequences. She simply laid out boundaries in a voice so steady it made Richard's anger look childish. "Going forward," she said, "communication about occupancy, property division, and financial documents should come through counsel. Richard may schedule a time to collect personal items. Vanessa is not to enter the home without Margaret's permission. No items belonging to Margaret, Helen Ellis's estate, or the household will be removed. No documents will be signed without review. And any lender inquiries involving this residence should be directed through proper channels." Richard grabbed the top page, scanned it, and tossed it back down. "This doesn't mean she owns everything." Elaine folded her hands. "No one said it did. It means you do not own what you claim to own. There is a difference." The room went silent. That was the sentence. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a clean cut through years of Richard telling the world he had built this home while I stood beside him smiling. Vanessa pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. As if her legs had lost interest in the performance. "You said the refinance would be easy," she said. Richard turned sharply. "Vanessa." She looked up at him. No softness now. "You said once she was out, it would be clean. You said she didn't understand money and wouldn't fight you." The words struck me. But not because they surprised me. They confirmed the shape of the shadow I had already seen. Richard had not merely underestimated me in private. He had sold my silence as part of his plan. Elaine glanced at me, checking whether I was all right. I was not. But I was standing. Richard said. "I was trying to make the transition less painful." I almost laughed. For whom he looked at me then. And for the first time since Vanessa entered my kitchen, I saw something close to fear. Not regret. Not yet. Fear. He asked. "What do you want?" "Margaret." The question was so late it nearly broke my heart. I answered. "I wanted a husband who respected the life we built. Since I don't have that, I want you out of my house today." The word "my" did what years of pleading could not. It stopped him. His eyes flicked to Elaine. To the deed. To the kitchen cabinets. To the hallway that led to the bedroom he had promised another woman. "You can't just throw me out," he said. But his voice had lost its certainty. Elaine stepped in before emotion could drag me somewhere unhelpful. "Richard will be given a reasonable opportunity to retrieve personal belongings. Today. Given the circumstances and the presence of movers hired without mutual agreement. Leaving is the wisest choice. We can coordinate next steps formally." Richard laughed again. But this time it sounded thin. "So that's at 31 years and you hide behind paperwork." I touched the edge of my mother's table. "No. Richard. 31 years. And I finally stopped hiding behind marriage." Vanessa stood suddenly. "I'm not staying for this." Richard turned toward her. "Vanessa. Wait." She stared at him like he was a stranger who had wasted her morning. Do you even have the money you said you had? He did not answer. That silence told her more than any document Elaine had brought. The movers left first. The older one came to the doorway, removed his cap, and said, "Ma'am, we're sorry for the confusion." I nodded because he looked embarrassed enough for everyone. Vanessa left next. Not with a dramatic speech, but with the quick, clipped steps of a woman recalculating her future. At the front door, she turned back once and looked at me. For a second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, "He told me you two were basically done." I said, "Then he should have finished one life before promising you another." She looked away and walked out. Richard remained in the kitchen, surrounded by the furniture of a marriage he had tried to rearrange without permission. He seemed smaller without an audience. "You planned this?" he said. "No," I answered. "You planned this. I prepared for it." He looked at the documents again. "You'll ruin me." The old Margaret would have rushed to soften that fear. To say no. "No. We'll work something out. I don't want you ruined." But I had finally learned that some people call it ruin when consequences arrive with their name spelled correctly. Elaine gave us a moment. But not too much of one. "Margaret," she said, "would you like Richard to collect immediate necessities now, while I'm present?" I appreciated the question because it gave me authority in my own kitchen. I nodded. "Clothes. Medication. Work items. Nothing from my mother's cabinet. Nothing from my office. Nothing from the locked box." Richard looked humiliated. But he went upstairs. I heard drawers open. Hangers scrape. Footsteps move through rooms he had assumed would always receive him. Elaine stood beside me at the table. "You did well," she said quietly. That was when my knees nearly failed. Not during the confrontation. Not when Vanessa spoke. Not when the deed hit the table. But when someone said I had done well. I gripped the back of a chair and whispered, "I don't feel well." Elaine's voice softened. "Strength rarely feels good while you're using it." I looked at the documents spread before us. At my mother's name. At mine. At the proof of a woman I had nearly forgotten. I thought I would feel happy when he finally understood. I said. Elaine shook her head. "No. You feel grief first. Relief comes later." Richard came down 20 minutes later with one suitcase and a duffel bag. He paused near the family photo wall. And I wondered if he saw what I had seen there 2 nights before. Yellowstone. Thanksgiving. Our son on a bicycle. My mother on the porch. A whole life made of moments he had mistaken for background. He set the bags by the door and said, "Where am I supposed to go?" I thought of all the times he had suggested an extended stay hotel for me as if exile came with free breakfast and clean towels. I did not say that. Cruelty was still not a language I wanted to become fluent in. "You have choices," I said. "You just don't have mine anymore." He stared at me for a long moment. "Maggie," he said. And the nickname landed between us like a key that no longer fit the lock. "Don't," I replied. His face tightened. Then he picked up his bags and walked out. When the door closed, I locked it. Then I slid the chain across for the first time in years. After Elaine left, Nora came over with a casserole I had not asked for and a box of tissues I pretended not to need. She did not ask for details. She simply put the casserole in the refrigerator, looked at the documents still stacked on the table, and said, "Your mother would be proud." That broke me more completely than Richard's anger had. I sat down at the oak table, pressed both hands over my face, and cried the way I had not cried when my husband first brought his mistress home. Nora sat beside me without touching my shoulder until I leaned toward her. Outside, the moving truck was gone. Richard's car was gone. Vanessa's perfume had finally faded from the kitchen. But the house still felt bruised. As if walls could remember insults. When I could breathe again, I gathered the deed copy, the inheritance letter, the tax bills, and Elaine's notes into one neat pile. Then I carried them to the fireproof box and locked it. My mother had told me to keep one truth to myself. I had Now that truth was no longer hidden. It was standing at the center of my home. Quiet and unmovable. Just like me. The first morning without Richard in the house was not peaceful. People imagine freedom arriving with sunlight through clean curtains and a deep breath that fixes everything. But mine arrived with a half-empty closet, a locked fireproof box, and a kitchen table that still seemed to be waiting for an argument. I woke before dawn because my body had spent 31 years listening for Richard's movements, the bathroom faucet, the closet door, his shoes against the stairs, the cough he made before asking where something was. None of those sounds came. The silence should have comforted me. Instead, it pressed against every wall. I walked through the house in my robe, touching ordinary things as if checking whether they had survived the storm, the banister, the hallway photos, the chipped corner of the sideboard, the pantry door where our son's height marks had faded into pencil ghosts. At the kitchen table, I found Nora's casserole note. Eat something even if you don't want to. I smiled. Then cried. Then reheated one small square because sometimes obedience to kindness is the first step back into your own life. Richard called 11 times in 2 days. At first, the messages sounded angry. You made me look like a criminal, he said, in one voicemail. You and that lawyer ambushed me. Then he tried wounded. After everything we built, I can't believe you'd put me out like a stranger. By the 4th day, his voice had softened into fear. Maggie. The bank is asking questions. I need access to some files. We should talk without Elaine. Please don't let outsiders decide our marriage. I listened to each message once and forwarded them to Elaine. Just as she had asked. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I no longer trusted myself to separate pity from responsibility. Pity had kept me married long after love had run out of places to sit. Responsibility had made me pay bills, smooth over insults, hide disappointments from friends, and protect Richard's pride like it was another child I had raised. Elaine replied with short, steady instructions. Do not respond directly. We will coordinate document exchange. Keep doors locked. Preserve all communication. Those words were not romantic, but they were safe. And safety was beginning to feel like a language I wanted to learn. Vanessa disappeared faster than her perfume. Nora heard from her niece, who worked at the salon downtown, that Vanessa had told someone Richard had misrepresented his situation. That was a delicate way to say he had promised her a house he did not own, a financial future he could not prove, and a wife who would step aside quietly because he had trained the world to expect that of me. I did not celebrate when I heard she had left him. For one thing, Vanessa had not been the root. She had been the bright flower growing out of soil Richard had been poisoning for years. For another, I understood how easy it was to believe a man when believing him made you feel chosen. Still, I would be lying if I said I felt nothing when I stood in my bedroom and replaced the missing space in my jewelry drawer with the necklace she had worn. I did not put it around my neck. Not then. I set it beside my wedding ring in the blue ceramic bowl and let both objects become what they truly were, evidence of a life, not instructions for the future. The divorce moved slowly. Not because the story was complicated, but because grief always moves slower than paperwork. Elaine handled the formal letters. Richard hired an attorney who used sharper words than necessary and then calmer ones after Elaine sent back the documents he had ignored. There were discussions about accounts, vehicles, furniture, personal property, and debts Richard had not been eager to disclose. I learned not every betrayal arrives wearing lipstick. Some arrive as balances on statements, late notices tucked into glove compartments, and business loans described as temporary until they become a pattern. When Elaine showed me the fuller picture, I sat in her office looking at the numbers and felt both foolish and strangely relieved. Foolish because I had missed so much. Relieved because the fog had a shape now. You were not stupid, Elaine said, as if she could hear the sentence forming in my head. You were busy surviving a marriage where one person benefited from your trust. I looked at the folder in my lap. That sounds like a polite way to say I let him. She shook her head. No. It is a precise way to say he used you. Richard came back once to collect the rest of his things. Elaine could not be there that afternoon. So Nora sat in my living room with a crossword puzzle and the alert posture of a retired woman who had raised 3 boys and feared no man carrying storage bins. Richard looked older when he walked in. Not humbled exactly, but worn at the edges. He avoided the kitchen at first. As if the table itself had become a witness he could not cross-examine. "I'll just get my tools from the garage and the boxes from the guest room," he said. I nodded. "Nora will stay with me while you do." His eyes flicked toward her. Nora smiled without warmth and said, "Take your time. But not too much." For almost an hour, Richard moved through the house, collecting pieces of himself: jackets, fishing rods, framed certificates. The old toolbox my father had given him, because Dad had once believed Richard would take care of me. When Richard lifted that toolbox, his face changed. "Your dad liked me," he said quietly. I answered. "A lot of people liked who you were when you needed them to." Before he left, Richard stopped by the family photo wall. He touched the frame from Yellowstone. The one where our son had chocolate on his mouth, and Richard's arm was around my shoulders. "Do you ever think about the good years?" he asked. The question landed gently, which made it more dangerous. Anger I could resist. Tenderness still knew my weak places. I stood a few feet away and told the truth. "Every day." He turned. And for a moment, I saw hope flare in him. I continued. "That's what makes this hurt. If it had all been terrible, leaving would be simple." His mouth tightened. "I made mistakes. I thought of Vanessa's purse, the moving truck, the loan papers, the necklace, the hotel suggestion. The way he had said, 'Margaret, she'll cry. Call her sister. And calm down.' You made choices," I said. "Mistakes are when you forget milk. Choices are when you bring another woman into your wife's kitchen and tell her to leave." He looked down. "I don't know where to go from here," I said. "Neither did I. But I didn't try to take your home to figure it out." That evening, after Richard drove away for the last time with the toolbox in his back seat, I did something I had not done in years. I rearranged the living room by myself. Not dramatically. I did not throw out every memory or paint the walls red like a woman in a movie discovering independence through interior design. I simply moved Richard's recliner out to the garage and pulled my mother's reading chair near the window. Under the chair cushion, I found an old grocery list in my mother's handwriting, tucked there from some holiday long past flour. Cranberries, butter, Maggie's tea. I sat on the floor and held that scrap of paper like a relic. My mother had been gone for 9 years. Yet she was everywhere that mattered. Not in a ghostly way. In a practical way. In the house documents. In the oak table. In the fireproof box. In the warning I had taken too long to understand. Love is not a reason to forget your own name. I taped that grocery list inside the pantry door. Not where guests would see it, but where I would. The first dinner I hosted after Richard left was not a holiday. It was a Thursday. And it rained all afternoon. Nora came over with cornbread. Elaine came straight from her office. Still, in her suit. Carrying a bottle of sparkling cider because she said wine made legal conversations too honest. I made chicken soup. Not because anyone needed impressing, but because the house needed a smell that belonged to me again. We sat at my mother's oak table. The same table where Vanessa had placed her purse and Richard had pushed his papers toward me. At first, I kept looking at the empty chair where he used to sit. Nora noticed and said, "Empty doesn't always mean missing. Sometimes it means room." Elaine lifted her glass. "To room," she said. I laughed. And the sound surprised me. It was rusty. But real. Later, when I served pound cake on the everyday plates, I realized I had not once apologized for the meal. The house. The silence. Or myself. That felt like a small miracle. Months passed. The legal process did what legal processes do. It demanded patience. Copies. Signatures. And the ability to read sentences that turned heartbreak into terms and conditions. Richard stopped leaving long voicemails. His messages became shorter. Mostly practical. Once, Near what would have been our 32nd anniversary. He wrote, "I am sorry for how I handled things." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted more. A confession large enough to match the wound. A paragraph about my mother's table. My necklace. The moving van. The years he had let me disappear. But life rarely gives women the apology they deserve. Sometimes it gives them one sentence. And they must decide whether to carry it, reject it, or set it down. I wrote back through Elaine that I acknowledged his apology and wished to keep all communication formal until everything was complete. That was not cold. That was clean. Forgiveness. I was learning. Did not require reopening the door. Sometimes, forgiveness meant refusing to spend another year standing behind it. Waiting for someone to knock correctly. When the divorce was finally settled, I came home from Elaine's office with a folder, a headache, and a strange lightness in my hands. The house remained mine. Not because life had magically rewarded the good woman and punished the bad man, but because my mother had planned carefully. I had kept records. And at the end I had found enough courage to let the truth speak in a room full of people who expected me to stay quiet. Richard kept what was his, faced what was his, and moved into a rental across town. I heard later that he was rebuilding parts of his business and attending church again. Sitting in the back instead of shaking hands near the front. I did not ask whether he was lonely. I knew loneliness well enough not to wish it on anyone. But I also knew it was not my job to rescue him from the life he had chosen. Vanessa never contacted me. Carol sent one stiff card that said she hoped we could all heal someday. I placed it in a drawer. Not the trash. Healing, unlike surrender, could wait. On the first Sunday of spring, I painted the kitchen curtains blue. Vanessa had said the old ones made the room feel older. And for months I had kept them out of stubbornness. Then one morning I looked at them and realized I did not want my decorating choices to be arguments with a woman who was no longer in my life. So I chose blue because I liked it. I polished my mother's table until the wood glowed. I donated Richard's recliner. I planted rosemary in a bigger pot. Then I opened the blue ceramic bowl in my bedroom and took out my wedding ring and anniversary necklace. The ring went into a small envelope for the safe. The necklace I clasped around my own neck. Not as a symbol of marriage, but as proof that what had been taken could be returned without returning me to the person I was. In the mirror, I saw an older woman with tired eyes, a soft jawline, silver at her temples, and a steadiness that had cost too much to look glamorous. "Hello, Margaret," I said. It sounded awkward. It sounded necessary. That night, I wrote a letter to my mother. I sat at her table with the rooster clock ticking above me and the fireproof box locked at my feet. I told her Richard was gone. I told her I had kept the house, though keeping it had hurt more than I expected. I told her I was sorry for all the years I had treated her protection like pessimism instead of love. I told her about Elaine, Nora, the moving truck, the deed on the table, and the moment Richard called me Maggie and I finally heard the difference between affection and access. Near the end, I wrote, "You told me to keep one truth to myself. But I think the bigger lesson was knowing when to bring that truth into the light." Then I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where Richard had searched for the garage code. The same drawer where he had pushed aside the envelope that undid him. The house was quiet around me. But not empty anymore. It had remembered me until I was ready to remember myself. I did not become a bitter woman. I became a careful one. I still cried sometimes when I passed the photo wall. I still missed the man Richard had been on our best days. And I still grieved the woman I had been when I believed patience could save what respect had already abandoned. But grief no longer had the only chair at my table. There was room now for Nora's laughter, Elaine's blunt advice, my son's occasional phone calls that grew longer after I finally told him the truth, and my own small routines: morning tea, evening walks, bills paid from accounts I understood, doors locked because I chose them to be, not because I was afraid. The house did not give me revenge. It gave me a place to stand while the truth did its work. And if anyone ever asks what happened after my husband brought his mistress home and told me to leave, I tell them this: he forgot whose name was on the deed. but I had spent too many years forgetting whose life it was. In the end, we both remembered.